you, Teresa.
It is September 1st, 2021 at 1 p.m. And we will call the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation Code Enforcement Officers Advisory Committee meeting to order. And I'll turn it over to Angelica so that she can proceed with the roll call.
Hubert Manny,
Present.
Stuart Walker,
Present.
Priscilla Miles,
Present.
Matthew Christensen,
Present.
Marie Brown,
Present.
Jody Nike,
Present.
Teresa Adrian, presiding officer.
Present.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. And before we get going to the next agenda item, since we do have a new committee member, Mr. McKinney, would you like to just introduce yourself to the rest of the committee and tell us a little bit about you?
Well, my name is Hubert, but I go by Donnie. My title here in Pecos is Director of Environmental Services, so I'm in charge of code enforcement, water, sewer, landfill, and trash collection. Before Pecos, I was in Sweetwater, Texas for 10 years, and before that, I was in the Navy. So I retired from the Navy in '09 and came back home to Texas. So really love my code enforcement portion of my job and excited to be a part of this committee.
Well, thank you for your service in more ways than one. So we're glad to have you on the committee. And also, I just want to thank all of the TDLR staff for all of your work and pulling this meeting together. Angelica, you have just been awesome to work with as always. All of the staff members there at TDLR are great to work with. And so I know that this is a little bit challenging doing the meetings like this, but much appreciated because it saved everybody some travel time. So without further ado, we'll go on and get to item number C on the agenda, and I will call on Dalma Sotera so that you can resume with the training for our committee.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dalma Sotero. I am the Assistant General Counsel for TDLR. I'm going to share my screen with y'all as I practice earlier. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm gonna start with, today we're gonna discuss, Today we are gonna discuss the Open Meetings Act, the Administrative Procedures Act, and the Public Information Act. Starting with the Open Meetings Act and its purpose. The purpose of this act is to ensure an open and transparent government. This act requires that meetings of government bodies like this one are open to the public and preceded by public notice of time, place, and subject matter of the meeting. The provisions of the act are mandatory and are to be liberally construed in favor of the Government Act. There are some key terms that we should discuss today, starting with the quorum. A quorum is a majority of the members of the advisory board or committee as fixed by rule or statute. In our case, we have 90 members. So in order to have a quorum, we need at least 5 to be present. A quorum of a governmental body must be present in order to take official action. if we have less than a quorum, we can discuss and listen to whatever we need to discuss, but what we can't do is take an official action on a certain thing like the proposed rules. The next key term that we need to discuss today is deliberation. According to the statute, the deliberation is a verbal or written exchange between a quorum of a governmental body or between a quorum of a governmental body and another person concerning an issue within the jurisdiction of the board or governmental body. The third key term that we have is meeting, and a meeting occurs anytime a governmental body engages in deliberation regarding public business or public policy over which the governmental body has supervision or control, or any time the body takes formal action. The fourth and final key term for this act is the notice. The act requires an advance written notice of date, time, place, and subject of each meeting held. TDLR provides this notice in the form of the agenda that has been given as part of your materials. Notice must be filed with the Texas Secretary of State at least 7 days before a meeting and must be posted online, both in the TDLR and the Secretary of State's website. A board or committee may not engage in discussions about a subject not included in the agenda. So I'm sorry about that. Here. No, I'm sorry. Here. So what about social functions, conventions, workshops? Keeping in mind that a meeting occurs whenever a quorum of the governmental body engages in discussion about an issue within the governmental body jurisdiction, you may be thinking, if can the members ever meet in an informal setting without violating the Open Meetings Act? Well, the answer is yes. Members are free to engage in conversations that are incidental to an event. However, the discussion will be subject to the Open Meetings Act if a quorum of members is involved and they engage in a discussion or make decisions about board or committee business or take formal action. Here we have a few key points that will be helpful to keep in mind as members of this committee. Always be aware of any situation occurring outside of a properly noticed meeting in which a quorum of members is present and engaged in a discussion. Do not engage in substantive conversations relating to board business or policy when a quorum is involved and if you are outside of an officially noticed and scheduled meeting. Please keep in mind that violations can happen in social media too. And beware the walking quorum. So what is the walking quorum? A walking quorum occurs when fewer than a quorum of members engage in discussion about official business and then communicate those discussions to other members, then altogether would constitute quorum. While fewer of a quorum of members participate in the initial communication, subsequent communication with other members will result in a quorum, discussion of official business outside of the public meeting, and in this situation, members could be out of compliance of the Open Meetings Act. Here we have a walking quorum example. Let's say that on a 5-member advisory board, 2 members exchange phone calls and emails expressing thoughts on an upcoming rule change, and then exchange research that they have each individually performed regarding the issue. One of the board members subsequently forwards the exchange to another member, so now we have 3 members engaged in the communications. The board members may now be engaged in a working quorum by engaging in a small group discussion outside of a properly noticed board meeting. Please consider that a working quorum can occur during conference calls, video conferences, hallway discussions, or email, text messages, and other new technologies. Communications, a working quorum concept combined with newer technologies or social media such as Twitter, Facebook, and instant messaging may raise new issues about meetings and compliance with the Open Meetings Act. Best practices to avoid a working quorum. To avoid working quorums, members should not meet in small groups where there is a discussion of board or committee business, and then communicate those discussions to other members, or send emails or text messages to a quorum of members regarding official business, even if the email is addressed and sent to each member individually. Should not create posts on social media about board business where a likelihood exists that a quorum of members could participate in discussions, or ask quorum members, even on an individual basis, for feedback or comments on board or committee business outside of the public meeting. This is also called polling, which is essentially conducting an informal vote on an issue. Oops. Here we're going back a little to when I was talking about the meetings that are supposed to be preceded by a public notice or the agenda. Well, a board or committee is limited to discussing the specific items on that agenda. During the public comment portion of the meeting, members or public are given an opportunity to speak. And the presiding officer may set reasonable limits on commenters. A member of the public or even a member of the board may raise a subject that has not been included in the agenda. However, we need to remember that the discussions must be limited to what's already in the agenda, and the discussion of a new subject must be limited to a proposal to placing it on the agenda for a future meeting when the proper public notice will be given. To avoid violating the act on the basis of insufficient notice, members should limit the discussions to the specific agenda items contained in the posting filed with the Secretary of State. Avoid allowing discussions regarding specific agenda items to wander off course into new issues to have not been noticed to the public. Please do not respond to or discuss issues that are raised during public comment but are not on the agenda, and specifically identify any items for future agendas and communicate those two items to TDLR staff so we can discuss it in a properly posted agenda. There are remedies and penalties for violations to the Open Meetings Act. The Act states that any interested person, including the media, may file a petition to the courts to stop actions taken in violation of the Act. And the Act also specifically states that an action taken in violation of the Act is voidable, which means that if we take an action over an issue like, for example, proposing rules in violation of the Act, a judge may order to void it and it would not be legally effective. There are also criminal penalties established for the members who violate the Act. So members who knowingly participate in a walking quorum or a meeting that is closed to the public are subject to misdemeanor criminal penalties. The penalties may be a fine between $100 and $500, confinement in a county jail for 1 to 6 months, or both, the fine and also the jail time. So here we have some best practices to guide you in complying with the Act. Try to avoid communications that involve or may involve a quorum of the board or committee members about official business outside of a properly noticed meeting. This is like a summary. Remember that communications may include emails, text messages, and social media posts. During an open meeting, confine the discussions to items specifically posted on the agenda. And remember that at the end of the meeting, you may ask new items to be included in the agenda for our next meeting. And here we have a list of the Open Meetings Act resources. You can also contact the Office of the General Counsel and we'll be happy to assist you if you have any questions. Are there any questions about the Open Meetings Act? Okay,
I do have one question, if you don't mind.
sir.
I took the little training a few years ago. Does that expire? Do I need to retake that training from the Attorney General, or once we've taken it once, we're good on that Open Meetings Act training?
When was that training? When did you take that training?
I did it online, probably 3 years ago.
3 years ago. Well, we are covering pretty much what's in there. I'm gonna check on you about that because I'm not sure if the advisory board team requires certification or to update the certification, but I can check with Mary or Angelica to see if it has to be renewed. But I think that this one covers pretty much what the other training covers.
Yes,
So
Doma, you are correct.
thank
They are good. Board, you're good, and you don't have to take another. This is your training, so you're good.
you.
Okay,
Thank you.
board.
Mary.
And as a reminder, please state your name when you unmic or unmute your mic. Please state your name so that they can record the minutes. That was Mr.
Mary
McKinney
Winston,
that was
TDLR,
asking.
thank you so much for that
Thank
reminder.
you.
See, we forget
Oh.
almost immediately. Thank you, Miss Adrian.
That was really for the benefit of our committee, but yeah, I guess
Thank
that
you.
would be for everybody. Okay, so without further ado, we'll go on to agenda item D, which is the approval of the November 8th, 2019 meeting minutes. I would ask for a motion. If the board had the opportunity to review the meetings, I would entertain a motion.
Stuart Walker, make the motion.
Is there a second? Thank you, Stuart.
Donnie
Matthew
McKinney, I'll
Christensen.
second that. Even though I wasn't at the meeting, I did read through them. So.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor? I guess we are not doing it as we would normally do it. So Angelica, I'll turn it over to you for the votes.
Thank you. Hubert McKinney,
Yes.
Stuart Walker,
Vote for.
Angela Miles,
In favor, yes.
Matthew Christensen,
In favor, yes.
Marie Brown,
In favor, yes.
Jody Nike. You're muted, Jody.
In favor, yes.
Thank you. And Teresa Adrian, presiding officer.
Aye, yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so the next agenda item is E, which is public comments, and I don't believe that we have anyone signed up for public comments.
Correct.
So we'll move on to the staff reports, and I will call on Lisa Hodek to talk about the licensing division activities.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. I'm Lisa Hodek, the licensing manager. And I want to start out by telling you that I have some new licensing analysts on my team. I have Crystal Hall, Kate Nowert, Gerald McLeod, and also Lisa Robertson. These hires were the result of some former employees that had moved on and within the division for promotions or other areas in the agency. So it was a good thing for them. Sad for me to lose my old employees, but this group is really good and they're doing a great job. And so I'm very proud to have them on my team. They all have some great experience. And then next we have the statistics, and you have fiscal year 2020 and then through the third quarter of 2021. So the total population for code enforcement officers is at 2,387. Code enforcement officer in training, we have 116. And then the last thing I would like to talk about is our emergency extension for, it's an emergency license extension. And I think Angelica is going to be sharing her screen. As you can see on our homepage where it says emergency license status. And if you can click there, please. And this tells about the emergency license extensions due to COVID-19. Basically, it allows all licensees, if they are trying to renew their license, and if the division is behind, which has happened at some times because of the pandemic and various reasons. But if we are running behind, this gives an additional 120 days after the license expiration date to allow you to continue working. And this was passed as an emergency rule by the commission, and it is for TDLR licensees with a renewable license that expired on or after August 1, 2020 and before September 18, 2021. It doesn't actually issue a license, but it does allow current licensees additional time to continue working in case they don't get their renewed license in hand at the time. Thank you, Angelica. And that concludes my report. I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions? Crystala?
Krista Miles with the City of Houston. One question, what is the turnaround rate now for code enforcement officers in training and code enforcement officers to obtain their certifications or their renewals?
The time frame for them to receive their certification is, it's in this area, we're doing pretty good. We usually say around 2 weeks. So we don't have a big we don't have a big backlog in this particular area, and we do try to stay caught up as much as we can. Of course, there may be times that, here and there that we might be running a little bit behind, but we do look at that at least on a weekly basis as far as our dates. And so if I see something that's a little behind, then I get my team on it pretty quickly. So 2 weeks is what we strive to do, at least.
Thank you.
Stuart Walker here. I want to commend you. I recently renewed my license within the last month, and I have to say I got my stuff within about a week.
Ah, awesome. Fantastic. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I have a question if nobody else does. Lisa, thank you so much. You always bring the most awesome data. I love looking at the data that you share with us. In looking at the new registrations issued, like for 2020, you have 184. I was just curious what the trends look like. Do you have any, since you've got these new hotshot analysts, maybe they could do some trending information for us and let us see, like going up 5 years back, how we are growing in numbers, or are we declining in the overall numbers? I know that the Building Officials Association of Texas, they're struggling to get building officials on board. They're losing people just due to age and retirement, and trying to get new blood in is a challenge. And so I was curious where we stand in the code enforcement world.
And I don't have that information handy, but I can certainly bring like at our next meeting, we can definitely do the last 5 years, if that's what you're interested in. And also I can, try to get any numbers that you are interested in as well. And you're right, we do have these great new analyst positions. So who knows what we're going to have in the future. But seriously, if y'all can think of anything that you're interested in as far as numbers from the licensing division, feel free to reach out to me or Ms. Winston. We'll be glad to get that for you.
Okay, yeah, I would certainly be interested in seeing some of the trends, because when you look back, then it helps you to look forward, and maybe we can start coming up with some sort of forecasts, and that helps us, understand if we need to do better outreach just to grow this profession. So this data is really helpful, and I appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then we'll move on to the Customer Service Division. Jacqueline Rush.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Rush, and I'm one of the customer service managers. This is my first time with your board, so I am happy to be here and present some updates for you. I've got a few personnel updates and some statistics to share with you. Starting with our personnel updates, after 15 years of service to TDLR, our Director of Customer Service, Trey Seal, has moved on to pursue other endeavors, and we wish him the very best in his pursuit. The impact that he has had on the division and the agency cannot be overstated, and we will miss him. Tuan Nguyen, who began working in the Customer Service Division in 2014, is the new Customer Service Director. He officially started his role on August 16th. Our Customer Service Quality Training and Performance Analyst, Stephen Nguyen, has accepted a position with TDLR's Office of Process and Project Management because of his impressive commitment to developing onboard training as the agency grew with more and more programs, and because of his dedication in helping develop more sophisticated and detailed reports. We are excited to see the value he will add to the OPPM team's projects. That being said, at the time that this was written, the Customer Service Division was hiring for a quality training and performance analyst and 8 customer service representative positions. We have actually concluded interviews for those roles, and we have a couple of additional CSR positions that have opened up. And so we'll be looking to bringing some new people on very soon. Moving on to the statistics portion, we have our statistics of calls and emails received in the last 2 fiscal years, fiscal year 2020 and 2021. What I'd like to point out, since I believe this particular group hasn't met in some time, and it's something that I've brought up in other advisory board meetings, you'll notice a decline in our particular numbers for emails starting in fiscal year 2021, or excuse me, 2020. You'll notice that they declined starting in about March. The reason for that is we were able to program the emails that come in through the web form on our contact page with attachments to go straight to the licensing team, straight to Ms. Hodek's team, to just avoid any bottlenecks. We kind of figured that if something is coming in with documentation, that's going to go to licensing anyway. Why bottleneck it at customer service? So that was a way to try to speed up some service for your folks. So that being said, I'll be happy to take any questions.
No questions? Jacqueline, thank you for that update, and thank you for the customer service that you guys roll out to all of the members. This is so important, and I will tell you, I remember at the very beginning when we were transitioning over to TDLR, a lot of folks, had frustrations, and you guys did such a great job with your outreach and hearing all of the concerns that folks had and addressing all of them. And you've continued to just address those concerns in a process improvement way, which really helps ramp up your customer service delivery. And so I just don't get any complaints from anybody. And people are prone to complain, but you're just not giving them anything to complain about. So you guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your service and all the feedback that you've given us over the years. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, no other questions, then we'll move on to the Enforcement Division. Amanda Barrera.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Amanda Barrera, and I'm a prosecutor in the Enforcement Division. This is my first time in front of you, so forgive me if I explain things that you may already know, and I know we have some new members as well. So I'd like to start off with some personnel updates. In April, we hired prosecutors Sarah McKinney, Rachel Session, and Hunter McKinley as attorney twos. These attorneys will work our inspection cases and our unlicensed air conditioning and refrigeration, as well as our electrician cases. Our newest prosecutor came to us from the Department of Public Safety's office. Prosecutor Cynthia Marple was hired last month as an attorney 3, and she'll be working on our transportation case. So a big welcome to our new prosecutors. Let's move on and dive into our statistics, which begin on page 21 of your materials. First, we have a breakdown between the CEO program and TDLR as a whole. So today we'll be discussing fiscal year 2020, which began on September 1st, 2019 through August 31st, 2020, as well as fiscal year 2021, which began on September 1st, 2020, and we'll be discussing those statistics through June of 2021. Here under the key statistics, we have listed our performance measures, and these numbers kind of tell the legislator how we're doing. So you can see that in fiscal year 2020, we opened 28 cases in this program. And in fiscal year 2021 through June, we opened 25 cases. In fiscal year 2020, we closed 17 cases and 23 cases in fiscal year 2021. The average time to close was about 116 days in fiscal year 2020 and 200 days in fiscal year 2021. But as you can see, we resolved within 6 months over 75% of our cases in fiscal year 2020 and over 50% in 2021. We had 0 cases resulting in disciplinary action in both years of fiscal year 2021 and 2020. And in fiscal year 2021, there are still 17 cases pending at the end of June. In our next graph, you can see the breakdown of where our cases come from. Most of our cases in the CEO program come from consumer-related cases, meaning that the cases are initiated based on a complaint from a member of the public. About 40% of the cases in fiscal year 2020 were criminal history, and about 10% of those were criminal history in 2021 through June. The criminal history cases are those where we look at an applicant or licensee's criminal history, and we determine if they're fit for licensure. Next, we'll see the case outcomes. First, we have it kind of broke down in our different orders that we have in this program. But because there were no cases that resulted in disciplinary action for either year, we don't have any commission orders, default orders, or agreed orders. But I did want to just explain what these are a little bit. So a commission order results from a complaint that is investigated, a prosecutor notes an administrative violation. The prosecutor will then send notice of alleged violations, or since we all love acronyms so much, we call it an NOAV. The respondent in the case then has the opportunity to request a hearing. It goes in front of the State Office of Administrative Hearings, who offers a proposal for decision, or again, a PSD. It's then sent in front of the commission to make a decision on the case. A default order basically means that we issued that NOAV and the respondent did not respond, so a default order is issued against them. And lastly, agreed order is where we've issued an NOAV, the respondent has responded, and we've entered into some kind of agreement for some administrative penalty or possibly a license sanction. For the program as a whole, as I mentioned, we had no disciplinary action, so there was 0 penalties and 0 license sanctions. However, we did informally resolve 17 cases in fiscal year 2020 and 23 cases in fiscal year 2021 through June. Informally resolved is an outcome that can be negotiated other than administrative penalty. For instance, the complainant can withdraw their complaint, or maybe the respondent has made some kind of corrective action, so we decided to issue a warning in that case. Next, we're going to discuss some of the top violations at opening. And these numbers reflect the allegations that were listed in the complaint and when the case was first opened. That may not be what the prosecutor decides actually happened or during the course of the investigation was actually determined. So in fiscal year 2020, criminal history was our top number for cases at opening, and in fiscal year 2021, it was unlicensed. That's all I have for you today, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
I have a question if nobody else does. You were showing the code enforcement officer case outcomes that were informally resolved at 23, total of 23, but the alleged violations down below total up to 26. And so I was curious, do you have 3 that you're still working on, or is it 26 make up the 23 because there could be multiple violations?
Well, the allegations below are those that are at opening. So those were what were determined at the opening that may not necessarily have turned into a case if a complainant didn't respond, or it could also have been like a snapshot that it was closed in the fiscal year before or something to that effect. But as far as the numbers go, at 23 were informally resolved.
Yeah, well, the good news is that it is such a minute percentage of the total complaints that you all receive, in the code enforcement realm. I don't know if that's because we're doing such an awesome job out there, or people don't know where to complain to. I don't know which it is, but nonetheless, those are really good statistics. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely, and I definitely think, as code enforcers, we share a similar goal in protecting the health and safety of the public, and so I believe that's also a reason why.
Very nice. Committee members, are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to the Regulatory Program Management Division and, Education and Examination Division, Michael Strawn.
Good afternoon, members. My name is Michael Strawn. I'm the manager for Education and Examination Division, and I'm here to give you our statistics for exams. In fiscal year 2021, we are looking like we're on trend to have administered about 10% more exams than we did in the prior fiscal year. We're right at it, but we do not have our current numbers for August at this point in time. I will point out, though, that the overall pass rate has dipped a little bit. It could come back up. Quarter 3 was lower than the other quarters, so we might see that levels out. We'll be able to fully report that in our next advisory board meeting. And our continuing education statistics, we remained pretty consistent. We added 3 new provider registrations in quarter 3. and have reported none for Q4 at this point in time. That concludes my report, and so I'm open to any questions you all may have at this point.
Teresa Adrian, presiding officer. I do have one question. Do you think that the outcome of pass versus fail on our basic code enforcement licensing exam could be attributed to some of the online classes that are taking place? I know that I've had a couple of code officers that have attended the online classes and didn't pass. And so I don't know if that's playing into this, or if you guys, what are your thoughts?
I don't have any data that would correlate one way or the other to be able to see who's taking an exam that took an online course versus an in-person course. It certainly could be a contributing factor. Of course, as y'all know, we always have our exam review committees. We have one coming up at the end of this year or early next year that we're going to be scheduling here soon, where we always look at our exam items to make sure they're up to date, that they're written correctly, keyed correctly, and that they make sense to the candidates. So that's something we always take into account as well. It's a very good question. I just do not have that data, being able to see who has taken what course before they sit for an examination to be able to tell you exactly if that correlation exists or not.
Okay, and just as a reminder, can you share with the group where someone would perhaps appeal a question on an exam?
Yes, ma'am. So at the time of the exam, the candidate has the ability to leave a comment on the questions. So if they do see something that has given them pause or question the feel that there's not a correct answer, or the question is written poorly, they can write a candidate comment at that point in time. Our exam vendor reviews those comments every month, and if they have questions, they bring them back to us. We have subject matter experts in many different industries. We review those candidate comments, and we look to see if there's improvements that need to be made. If there were anybody that potentially did get a question right, that let's say it was potentially written wrong or the answer key was wrong, we will amend that. We would adjust the score accordingly in that case. But we do not contest scores after the fact. If you cannot contest them with myself or anybody else here at TDLR. We do that with the vendor at the time that they're taking the examination.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Questions? Okay. Thank you,
Teresa, I have
Michael.
a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Christy Lamiles with the City of Houston. Question regarding the examination. Is there any way to show the correlation of time from when the actual person took the code enforcement class and the exam? Because I've noticed that when people wait a long or an extended amount of time, they're not fresh, their memory is not fresh, and they often fail. And we have to do a refresher course for them so that they can pass the test. Is there any way that we can put maybe some indicators in place before they take the exam and have a question say, when did you take the class?
I would actually, I don't know for sure exactly what information is kept on when they submit their information, if we have the date of their class exactly to be able to match with that. Certainly something we can look at, and if we do have that data, certainly bring it to you all. I know that in certain other programs, that is definitely the case, is the education. If people are testing immediately after they receive their education, oftentimes that information is more fresh, and we do see higher pass rates at that point.
I concur with Ms. Miles on that. I mean, that is the one thing that I have heard, is that there is quite a delay from the time that someone, not from the time that they take their exam and then, submit all of their paperwork so that they can get scheduled, but from the time they submit their paperwork until the time that they can get scheduled, there is a huge lag. And so I would be interested in seeing what does that lag look like.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so we certainly can look to look at the times that it's taking people to be able to register. I do know that, and especially last year with COVID, we were running, we were held to 25% capacity, then 50% capacity. We continue as an effort to open additional testing sites. We are using third-party examination sites with our exam vendor, creating more capacity, longer hours, open on weekends. And so when we had COVID hit and shut everything down, it was not just y'all's industry that was impacted, it was everybody. The floodgates opened back up. We have been seeing, we do monitor the seat availability with our vendor and the time it takes for individuals to get scheduled. Some of the longer exams, we can create more openings for them, make sure that there is that availability for those individuals seeking to take that exam. So something we will certainly address and make sure it's there, but we have been working diligently to bring that time down. At one point, right after COVID started, we were about 2.5 months due to the closure. And we've come down to a few weeks in most cases for people to get their examinations scheduled. We are continually working to improve those processes. And a lot of times it could be dependent on where you are. You know, if you're looking to test in Dallas or Houston, there may be more seats that are occupied due to the nature of those cities being busier than you may have out in, Waco. I will say that we are currently working on, with all of our industries, on bringing exams, written examinations online as well, so that individuals do not have to travel. They can have capacity across the state. We're not limited to buildings, and we continue to roll those out in many of our industries, and it will be coming to this industry as well soon.
That would be awesome. That would be greatly appreciated. The unnecessary lags that, obviously in many cases were probably out of y'all's control just due to COVID and the seating availability. But that also puts a strain on municipalities from a budgetary standpoint, because as once you don't use those funds, you lose those funds. And so it's really important that we, shuffle these people through the process, when they take their class, get signed up to take the exam and get the exam. But I know that some of that's not within your control, but anything that you can do to help would be greatly appreciated. And the ability to do online exams will be a game changer for sure. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then we'll move on to the Regulatory Program Management Division. Rick Garza.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Garza. I'm the Program Specialist for the Code Enforcement Officer Program. A personnel update on March 31st, Yvonne Feinleib retired as the RPM Building and Mechanical Section Manager after many years of state service. And Chris Russey has been promoted to Building and Mechanical Section Manager on May 15th to fill the vacancy created by Yvonne's retirement. He'll be available after I speak to say hello and introduce himself. Current projects, activities, continue to work with licensing on reviewing educational and experience requirements for the issuance of licenses and the code enforcement officers and code enforcement officers in training. And I also continue to provide customer service to internal and external customers by answering questions pertaining to code enforcement. Public outreach, it's been slow due to COVID, but on July 22nd, I presented to the East Texas Environmental Health Association Summer Conference in Tyler, Texas. An overview of topics included COVID updates, dog bite stick for code enforcement officers, and a review of licensing, examinations, customer service, enforcement, and continuing education. Future public outreach, I will be attending and giving a short presentation to the Texas Environmental Health Association 65th Annual Educational Conference, October 6th through the 8th. And that'll be located at the Kalahari Resort and Convention Center in Round Rock, Texas. And I will continue as COVID allows to do ride-alongs with code enforcement officers in the field to learn everyday challenges that code enforcement officers encounter. And that completes my report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, so the big pink elephant in the room, I'm dying to know how your dog bite sticks conversation went. I mean, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, in the last two legislative sessions ago, the code enforcement officers were given the right to carry a dog bite stick. At the same time, through that legislation, basically all batons or weapons such as brass knuckles or anything like that were also legalized. So they basically specifically put in the code enforcement officers that they have the right after receiving training to carry a dog bite stick.
Yeah. Yeah, I understood the legislation part of this. I was just curious how it was received when you presented that information.
You know, I don't think it wasn't that big of a problem that people have had. I have not heard of any issues or uh, training issues that people had when that law was changed. So at this point in time, I'm going to say we haven't had any issues with it.
That was a great law that got changed because up until then, code enforcement officers had a clipboard and a radio to defend themselves with. So one small step for mankind here. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions?
Presiding Officer, Mary Winston, TDLR. I just wanted to note that Chris Russi is here. If he wanted to say something, he came from the Enforcement Division, and he would hate to see me coming because I would have so many questions and I'm always like, Chris, but I'll owe you a beer. And he's like, no, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. And he's always been so gracious and he's my friend and I want to congratulate him on his promotion and it's fantastic. And just to introduce himself, he's always done the numbers in the background for enforcement and so many different things involving this program. So Chris, if you wanted to say something, now's your chance since I put you on the spot.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. As Mary and Rick said, my name is Chris Russi. I'm the new section manager for the Building and Mechanical Program section in RPM. As Mary said, I was previously the management analyst in the enforcement division. Many of y'all I worked with when we created documents like the penalty matrix and also the criminal conviction guidelines. So again, we've worked together for years and I'm looking forward to serving y'all in this new role. And Mary, I think we're up to a keg now, not just a beer. So thank y'all very much. And I'm open to answer any questions
I
if you
know
have any.
it's true.
Congratulations on your promotion.
And also, before we move on, you asked and we delivered. Miss Lisa Hodak, can you come back on? Thank you to Dee Dee, her manager in the background, who's like, we're on this thing. So we have some stats to show you. Lisa, do you want to kind of just run through them?
Yes, thank you, Mary. Yes, this is Lisa Hodak, licensing manager again, and Ms. Winston was correct. My boss was listening. Dee Dee McEachern, the licensing director, heard that you had asked about the last few years, the population history, and so she quickly gathered those numbers for us and presented them to me and sent me a chat, and so here we are. So thank you, Dee Dee. The Code Enforcement Officer Program transferred to TDLR in 2017, which was fiscal year 2018. And so that's the earliest numbers that we will have. And as you can see, 2018, the number of code enforcement officers was at 2,409. The number of code enforcement officers in training was 162. And then the total population was 2,571. And then we have the numbers for 2019 and 2020. So they have dropped a little bit. The number of code enforcement officers was 2,409, 2,401, and then 2,364 in 2020. Code enforcement officers in training was 162, 142, and then went up to 151. And then the total population was 2571, 2543, and then 2515.
So there's been a slight decrease, but I think that that could also be attributed to downsizing of staff over the, just cost savings opportunities. People are, I know that we do it here in Irving, but many other municipalities do as well. We are also in the process improvement mode, just like TDLR is. And so anytime that we can, do those process improvements and streamline operations to save money, that can equate to, reduced staff. So I don't want to blame everything on COVID. It's getting about enough rap as it is. So anyway, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for pulling that together like in a nano flash. That was awesome. So
thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to the next agenda item? Thank you all for those staff updates. You are always so accommodating and gracious to the committee, and we appreciate you. So moving on to agenda item G, and this is the discussion, possible recommendation for proposed amendments having to do with the code enforcement officer in training. Come on. Did I skip one? I did it again, didn't I? David Gonzalez. Mary was talking, and so
it's my fault.
I know it's not, it's mine. Yes, we did skip item 6 and left out the executive office.
Miss Adrienne, I have to tell you, that is my favorite acknowledgement of someone who wants to make a comment. David properly, Mary Winston TDLR, David properly raised his hand and you were like, come on. I love that. So that's my favorite one. And we've done a ton of these. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about that.
So good afternoon, Presiding Officer Adrian, Advisory Board members. I am David Gonzalez, the Deputy Executive Director of Licensing Services. And I promise to keep the report brief. I know we got some other business to take care of, but Mary Winston and I will be delivering this brief report addressing the 87th legislative session and a bill implementation update. Mary's going to take care of the communication, outreach, and statistics that are associated with y'all's program. So we've all had a phenomenal, unique year with the pandemic this past year. The legislative session actually started out really slow because legislators had to work through their leadership changes and how they were going to go get their business done during the pandemic. Mask, no mask, testing, no testing, in a group or virtual, all those things had to be figured out. Once they got that on track, things picked up pretty quick for us. And at one point, I believe our staff were tracking about 300 bills that could have had some effect on our agency or our agency responsibilities. That's a lot for us to keep up with. We still like to refer to ourselves as a small agency with big responsibilities, but we're getting into the mid-range category with the level of size, and definitely with 40 programs or close to, it gets to be overwhelming. So any of these bills touching on any of these statutes and rules, we have to keep track of them to try to make sure that we're on top of it and keep the pulse on all those programs. Of course, we had many of our staff assisting our executive director. Mr. Francis is a dynamo. He is very well recognized across the street at the Pink Building, but he can't be everywhere at every time. So he actually had his deputy executive directors and governmental relations staff. He had program specialist staff all prepared to give testimony, learning everything we needed to know about the bills that were being proposed. He had staff in the background preparing documents for us to go over with and statistics, just like we try to do for these advisory board meetings. Of course, we had to get tested regularly every time we went to the Pink Building, wear our masks, do the maintaining of the social distancing, all those things. So that those sessions are rough work for us, and they keep us busy because we have to go over there every day that the legislators show up. We got to show up if they've got a meeting or a discussion over any of our bills. So all of the bills that affect our agency, I want to say this for the public's benefit, can be found on the very first page of our webpage, main webpage. You can click on one little spot there where it says statutes affecting our programs, and it'll give you a link to the Texas Legislature Online, which is another good point to save if you don't have one already in your bookmarks or your favorites. That information is directly from Texas Legislature, but we've got it on our webpage just to make it easy. So if there's something that you were interested in, you can go to our main page and find out what statutes may have affected those programs. The most significant bill, I'm not going to go through all of them because not a lot of them were there to affect CEOs, but the most significant bill that we were tracking affecting the agency that does affect CEOs is Sunset Bill HB, House Bill 1560. That's the one that keeps our agency going, and every state agency has to go through a sunset process. So after about 2 years of working with the Sunset Advisory staff and having them do a deep dive into our agency processes, make recommendations, and we get to give our feedback, the public gets to see the recommendations, I'm very pleased to report that our sunset bill was passed. And so that means TDLR has been given another 12 years as an agency, which was a huge relief off of our shoulders because we'd like to stick around and keep doing the business that we're doing. We have big responsibilities to the public. So having that sunset bill pass was a big deal for us and one of our main goals. Now, again, legislative session, there's lots of other bills, not a lot affecting code enforcement officers. We've had some bills filed for consolidation of programs, our barber and cosmetology programs in particular. We've had some bills filed for deregulation, like our auctioneers program at one time, and some of our licenses in our barber and cosmetology programs, like the instructor licenses, were proposed for deregulation. We've got some new requirements for the home warranty programs that were done at TREC. So a lot of things going on with different legislation. I want to make special mention of our governmental relations staff. Presiding Officer Adrian, you were talking about how we do try to do our best to serve the public. This governmental relations staff had to bend over backwards this session because there was so much going on. So I want to recognize Steve Bruno, Jeremiah Kuntz, Eric Beverly, who's since moved on to be one of our field division managers, and we had General Counsel helping out Jessica Escobar, Jeff Kopus, new to the government relations staffing, and also behind the scenes, one of our executive staff, executive assistants, Karen Berryman, who is preparing a lot of the materials. So it's not just Brian Francis, who does get to take a lot of the credit, and the deputy executive directors sometimes get to take the credit. It's all this staff in the background doing this work, preparing us, giving us our short notes, and even the program specialists in our different divisions, our customer service staff, providing us feedback on a daily basis to make sure we're prepared for those legislative sessions. So after the end in May, we get to take a very small breather. But sure enough, in June, we have to hit the ground running because most of these bills have some kind of deadline on when we're supposed to implement them. Lots of them have a September 1 deadline on when they're supposed to be implemented. So by June, we've already got bill implementation teams assigned. This is something that Brian takes great pride in, and for years, he has gone through the list himself one by one. He takes recommendations from his staff, from his deputy executive directors and division directors, but we actually get a cross section from the entire agency. This is actually how we develop our bench strength at the agency. We take people from the licensing division, customer service division, finance division, general counsel. So we get a broad perspective from everybody that has shown some interest or has some touch on a program. We get their feedback and they're able to provide input into the bill implementation process. So we currently have 20 plus bill teams right now working on the many bills that have been passed and have some effect on our agency. Those bill teams have been breaking into subgroups to decide, okay, we've got a new bill. How do we communicate to the public how we're going to implement this bill? How are we going to win, and how are we going to do the rule drafts? Of course, all those rule drafts have to go through the advisory boards. They actually have to be prepared for the commission for final approval. It's always going to include the public input because we want to be inclusive and transparent in our process. So there's 20 plus bill teams working on even more bills, trying to get that all established within the short time frames that were provided on those bills. So a lot of work that goes into it. And I just want to make sure in this meeting recognize all the work that goes on, including people like Dalma Sotero and Jacqueline Rush, who you saw earlier in the meetings. they're participating in some of these bill implementation teams, and their input and feedback is what makes this stuff work. I think that's all I wanted to share. Miss Winston, if I've forgotten anything, let me know. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to hang out and answer them.
Thank you, David. I wanted to add that even though Eric Beverly had moved on within the agency, as the new director for our field inspector team, he also provided great support, and we all had a day or so or more over at the Pink Building. Um, Late nights and good fun, right? So for the statistics for our for your program, our informal kind of continual survey that we do to know what we're putting out there and if it's being seen, if it's something else that we need to put out, and how many times it's viewed. And that gives us a snapshot of the job that we are doing with getting that information on the web page. So for our code enforcement officer website, we had over 26,000 views. For this is a snapshot of 3 months. I'm sorry, 6 months. We had an average of 145 views per day, 57% access from that desktop computer, 41% from a smartphone, and 2% from a tablet. The top reasons for visiting the site: to apply for a new code enforcement officer in training registration. Then we have administrative rules, examination requirements, how to apply for a new code enforcement officer registration, and finally, continuing education requirements. So we try to get this information out there and available. And by seeing who comes to the page, or not necessarily who, but how many come to these different pages, it gives us information to know that we are directing the information that's needed on this page. So if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. If not, this is it. And Miss Adrian, you can move past our staff reports.
I'm doing the math just for a second. If you take the total number of code enforcement population, take the total number of hits on your website divided by the number of code enforcement officers we have out there, that's like an average of 11 per code enforcement officer. I'm so glad to hear that people are using your website.
We are too. We are too.
It's very user friendly, and
Awesome.
this is just great information. So you guys are very,
Webmaster's hanging out in the background, so I think he'll like to hear that as well.
yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you both for that update, and I apologize for glossing over you. It was totally accidental. So the next one is agenda item G, and I'm going to turn that over to Dalma Sotero so that we can talk about the code enforcement officer in training versus code enforcement officer license. And I think that's a hot topic for a lot of folks because it has seemed a little clumsy. So I love what you guys are recommending here.
That's good. Thank you. My name is Alma Sotero again, for the record, Assistant General Counsel for TDLR. I'm going to be presenting the agenda item G and try to share my screen. Okay, can you all see the Word document? Perfect, thank you. So, yeah, the agenda item G is to discuss and for possible recommendation on the proposed rules to the existing proposed amendments to existing rules at 16 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 66, Sections 62.20 and 62.80. The proposed amendments amend the registration term for a code enforcement officer in training who upgrades the registration to a code enforcement officer registration from the remainder of the training registration term to a full 2-year registration from the date of issuance of the upgrade. This proposed amendments also eliminate the need for the newly upgraded code enforcement officer to have to renew the new registration sometimes within days of the upgrade when the initial 1-year registration term expires. So here we have the two sections of the rules that we are proposing amendments to. The underlined text is the new language that we are proposing today, and the strike through text with the brackets is the language that we are proposing to delete. The first proposed change that you can see in section 62.20, it's only to substitute the word shall by most, because we want to take this opportunity to implement TDLR's plain language rulemaking guidelines to improve readability. I'm sorry. So that's just something that we would like to do, and it doesn't change anything important or substantive on the rule. The next change that you can see here is at the end of the last sentence that we are adding the language for a term of 2 years from the date of issuance, as I mentioned before. With this addition, we are proposing, yes, to amend the registration term for the code enforcement officers in training who applies for an upgrade to a 2-year registration term. So the third and last amendment that we are proposing today is in section 62.80, subsection D. The proposed rules were recommended by staff to address the current suggestion from licensees to reconcile the upgrade and renewal process and pay only one fee. So the proposed rule amendments to this section combines the renewal process and the fee with the CIT's upgrade and fee process, and eliminates the second application process that they were requesting to be removed. Are there any questions with the proposed amendments? Hearing none. Yes.
Yeah,
Taylor.
I have a question. This is Teresa Adrian. So what was the cost before versus, I mean, what would the cost have looked like before this change versus what it looks like now?
It was the same amount. It was just divided, the $25 for the upgrade and the $75 for the renewal. So now we are saying, okay, the two are combined. You have the renewal, you have the upgrade, and it's the same amount of money.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you for your question. Are there any
Are
other
there any questions?
Okay.
Okay. If there are no questions, I would entertain a motion.
Let me stop sharing my screen.
I'd like to make a motion we approve staff's recommendation.
Okay, I believe that was Matthew Christensen. Is there a second?
Stuart Walker, I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and I'll turn the voting over to Angelica.
Hubert McKinney,
Aye.
Stuart Walker,
Aye.
excuse me, Priscilla Miles. I'll come back to Miss Mouse. Matthew Christensen,
Aye.
Marie Brown,
Aye.
Jody Knight,
Aye.
Teresa Adrian, presiding officer,
Aye.
and Miss Priscilla Miles again. Without it, the motion still passes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so moving on to agenda item H. This is where we can talk about some recommendations for future agenda items. And so do we have any items of interest that we would like to see brought back before us?
Mary Winston, TDLR. I'm sorry. So, Doma, for the the upgrades, edits that you have initiated for this draft, what are next steps?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mary, for the reminder. Yes, if now that we are going to move forward with this, we are going to be filing the proposed amendments with the Texas Register. We have a timeline for them to be filed on the 13th, so they can get published around September 24. We're going to have a 30-day period for public comments. And once we receive those comments, we're going to review them and make any necessary changes to the rules if there are any changes that we agree to or we need to do. And then we can meet again, I'm assuming by the end of the year, to discuss any possible changes and the public comments that we have received, so you can review everything once again and decide if you're gonna um, approve them or recommend them to go for adoption in front of the commission.
Thanks, Delma. I was Mary Winston again. I was trying to kind of kill two birds with one stone by giving any new members a little update on the process. So it's going to come back to you all, right? But before it comes back to you, as Delma said, it has to go out for public. It's got to be registered in the posted in the Texas Register. Folks get a chance to comment, so they have that 30-day comment period. This group is a really calm group, and I'm not saying other groups are rowdy. I'm just gonna say this one's a really calm group, and we appreciate it. Because if we get public comments, sometimes the public comments can be voluminous. We don't anticipate voluminous comments based on these, but Delma has to have a chance to review them, and we'll operate on her timeline and her schedule for all the programs that she has to get that reviewed and to have that time period of calling you back for another meeting. At that meeting, if there are public comments, Delma will go over those and let you know what has been said or any anticipated changes. And then the committee will vote to send these to our commission for approval. So as we look at recommendations for agenda items for next committee meeting, that's going to be one of those items that's just going to fall in line with this process for rulemaking.
Right. Thank you, Mary.
Yes, Ms. Winston, thank you so much for that. And are there any other agenda items that anyone would like to recommend for upcoming meetings?
This is David Gonzalez, Deputy Executive Director, Licensing Services. Just a reminder that I believe y'all do have some working groups assigned. So if there's any issues that come up between now and the next couple months that need to be discussed, y'all could use those working groups to get those done. And again, go through that process with Ms. Winston to get an agenda item filed with us for the next meeting. So just remember that y'all have that interplay with work groups. Can't be over a quorum. And if we need a reminder on those work groups, just let us know. We can send you out, because I know Mr. McKinney's a new member. He may want to be assigned to one of those work groups. That's
Well,
all.
and to that point, is it possible that we can get a work groups update?
Definitely. That can be another item. And yes, definitely. Thank you.
All right. So the next item is I, which is a discussion of a date and time for the next advisory committee meeting. And I think that we can just wait to hear about the item that is going to be coming forward, and then that kind of will generate the timeline for that. So we'll just wait to hear from TDLR staff. If there's anyone opposed to that, please speak up now. Otherwise, then we'll move on to item J. And before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I do want to thank all of the TDLR staff for just accommodating us and keeping this information out. when you guys bring that proposed amendment forward, not only are you, doing something to eliminate the need of a newly upgraded code enforcement registration, you're streamlining your process again. And you keep doing this, and it's so nice that you don't get stagnant. You don't just, accept the status quo, and you keep moving TDLR in a forward motion, and that is just so greatly appreciated. And then to the committee, thank you all for your service to our code enforcement profession. And with that said, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Matthew Christensen, I motion we adjourn.
Second?
Donnie McKinney, I'll second that.
I think we could just at this point say all in favor. Aye, and raise your hands.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day and be safe.
Thank you.
Time is 2:34. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Ms. Winston.